Can I call him
Welcome
Stan?
to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center.
All right.
My name's Reed Price, and I'm happy to have you here. I'm the director of the center. We're going to be talking a little bit about artificial intelligence and machine learning. They're hot topics right now. What we're going to talk about is not sort of the chatbot stuff that's being thrown at you by your browsers as much as talking with somebody who's just like us, who's tried to use AI. He's Will Neff. He is a writer, and he was researching a novel and used AI to help him do that. And so maybe he can give us some learning, some of his experience, and we will get to that in just a minute. But I would like to start by thanking Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which is a sponsor of Something to Talk About here in the nonprofit world. We are very appreciative of support from folks like Fieldstone. They offer independent living, assisted living, and memory care up on Rolling Bay. And if you'd like to take a tour of their lovely campus, call Celia or Jamie or look at fieldstonecommunities.com. Their phone number is 206-594-1010. That's 206-594-1010. So, Will, I really want to thank you for agreeing to kind of be our guinea pig today to talk a little bit about your experiences because you're not an AI creator. And a lot of the stuff we hear from the creators is almost unintelligible to us regular folks. So I thought that when you and I were talking about your experience, it might be really useful for us to sort of follow in your footsteps or learn from your mistakes or successes.
That's great. Yeah, I'm happy to help out.
So why don't you start by telling us about why you turned to these tools? I know there are a number of them, Chatbot and Gemini, and I think there's something called Copilot that's built into Microsoft's browser. But
hmm
why don't you tell us how and why you started to play around with these tools?
Sure, I'd be glad to. It really started back in, I think it was 2020 or 2021 when the first large language model started becoming publicly available. And as a speculative science fiction writer, I sort of see it as my duty to keep up on these trends. So when ChatGPT became publicly available, I signed up for early access. I think I was a beta user actually, and for no other reason than just to try it out and experiment with it and see what it could do. Excuse me. The more I played around with it, the more I started to see possible ways I might be able to incorporate it into my creative process. And then I started experimenting in that way.
So what were you expecting that you might when you start? I mean, did you have any expectations, or was it just like, let's just play with this and see what might be there?
The latter, definitely at first. I went into it with an open mind, and I would actually recommend anybody who wants to start working with large language models to do the same thing. It's Writing queries for large language models is very different from like doing Google searches. There's a whole different system for it and a lot more nuances to it. And so I think it helps to set aside all of the old ways of keying in queries and searches and that sort of thing and approach large language models with a whole new outlook.
Well, I know that when I was first learning about Google or Bing, um, there used to be like little things that you could do. So you would like search for a topic, and then you'd have handles or parameters or something that would say something like, "I want to look on this website," and so it was almost like having to learn a little bit of code. You're
Mm-hmm.
saying that's not the way that I mean that large language models work. Does that mean that when you say there's a different way, is it just using normal, trying to like have a conversation with the search engine?
Exactly. That is one of the biggest distinctions and one of the most interesting distinctions, I think. Back in the early days of Google, I guess I'm dating myself a little bit by even saying that. But in the early days of Google, you know, what worked really well for searches then was using Boolean symbols to integrate into your searches. And boy, Google, I think, was one of the most powerful search engines to integrate those Boolean symbols in. But that age is gone now with large language models. It is much more like talking to someone, speaking with someone, interacting conversationally with someone than it is like searching on Google.
You would ask a question and then you'd get a response and then you'd say, "Can you tell me more about?"
Exactly. And it really helps to be very specific and even in a conversational way. And this is exactly what I mean by setting aside all the old ways of doing things. It is really startling when you first start working with ChatGPT, or I presume a Gemini or any of the other ones at this point, because these are very powerful large language models, very powerful algorithms at work here, more so than I think we as human beings have really been exposed to for the most part. The power in computing we've seen, at least lay people like myself who don't work in laboratories, is really just the ease of the interface, and how well the operating system works. These are the old ways of thinking about how well a computer works. With large language models, it's you have to think more about, I'm interacting with another being here, and that being has access to a huge amount of information that it can synthesize extremely fast, far faster than any human being could ever imagine. And I need to interact with that being and give it precise instructions in the form of a query for what I'm looking for, so it can help me the best it can. There's almost like a social touch to it in a way.
Oh, the other thing that I've heard is that, um, and seen actually, is that you can
Mm-hmm,
have what are called hallucinations. In other words,
mm-hmm,
that being is really only operating off of the data that is presented. And there's a lot of it, as you said, but some of that data is bad data. So
mm-hmm.
you might end up with getting things that maybe sound reasonable or sound unreasonable as a result of your query. Have you had that happen to you?
And that's another good thing to bring up, because I mean, I guess just like human beings, large language models are fallible at times. They have hiccups in the way they work. I think you are probably correct, Reed, that a lot of the time is they're accessing bad data somewhere out there. But I also can't help but wonder whether at times they're accessing data that can't be reconciled easily, and so they're sort of experiencing like crossed wires or something like that. And so the large language model does the very best it can to reconcile those things, but it can't completely without letting go of one piece of information or the other. So it ends up putting something out there that is a little seems a little deranged, I guess would be a good way of putting it.
So we have some other folks on the call here, and we are now actually syndicating this through um, Apple's podcasts and Spotify. So if you're listening to this and you want to get the full picture, you can always join us on YouTube, or you can recognize that there are because we have video on YouTube, or or anyway, recognize there are other folks in the room, if you will. And Sheila Kerwin is one of them. Sheila, you have a comment you want to get in here?
Hey, Will. Yeah.
Hi, Sheila.
Hi there, my friend. How how do you know if you've got a crosswire going?
It's hard to tell. It's sort of, I guess the way I would, the closest analogy I can think of is when you're talking with someone who maybe is really tired, or just having, not the clearest thought process they're in. And they may be speaking in a way that all the words line up and everything seems to make sense, but there's just this sort of at this intuitive level, it's like that just doesn't seem quite right to me. That those are the times that I've actually spotted this. I'm sure there have been other times where I didn't spot it. For me, being a fiction writer, it doesn't carry such a weight of uh, difficulty if for some reason I end up using something in my, as from the research I do with the model, using something in my books. It's not that big a deal because it's fiction. But for people who worked firmly in a fact-based world, it's a much bigger problem, and they do need to be very careful.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Your speculative fiction, science fiction. How have you been? Maybe you can give us an example or two of how you've tried to imagine the future or imagine what a device in the future might look like, based on input from this artificial being.
Sure, I'd be glad to. This is actually my first novel. It's available on Amazon right now. Sapiens. I publish under the name Walden Haynes, and that book actually is about artificial intelligence and what I term uh, very advanced form of artificial intelligence called synthetic consciousness, which is effectively interacting with an emotionally alive and intuitive being. And that's the sort of AI that is discussed in this book. No AI was used in the process of writing that book, though.
Um,
Oddly enough, I didn't start using AI I published *Sapiens* in May 2020, so it was right at the very beginning of large language models becoming public. So my next book, I actually did use LLMs for research assistant, basically. And I did some initial experimenting just purely out of curiosity, being fully aware of the ethical implications. I did some experimenting with writing using AI, using an LLM, ChatGPT in my case. And I just did not get good results. Not that I was really that interested in getting good results, but nothing I was able to create that way really I would have found acceptable to publish or anything like that if I had wanted to. Ethically, I would not. Ethically, that was a sandbox experiment, and none of the efforts in that sandbox experiment were going to end up going into my books. Um,
Do you think that
the one
I do think that there's now a sort of protocol of indicating if AI was part of the production of something so that you can legitimately say, this book or process was enhanced or used AI as part of the resource. But I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Yes, and I will be including um, a notice to the audience or whatever, to the readers in my second book, that I used AI for research. And I can give you a couple examples of how I did that too. Basically, the one thing that I found interesting about writing with um, ChatGPT was the editing capacity of ChatGPT, which was really startling. Just to play around a little bit, I took some of my writing, a chunk of my writing, and I fed it to ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to edit it to make it sound like Ernest Hemingway or Barbara Kingsolver or some, and just to see what it would do. And that was amazing because it took my writing and converted it into the voice of another author quite well. I mean, it was really startling. But anyway, moving on from that was just a strange little experiment. I'm glad I did it because it was really eye-opening. But again, I would never use that in my writing. What I have learned, especially from going through that process of experimenting and learning, and I would recommend that people choose one large language model to work with. I chose ChatGPT because it was the first one out there, and I got comfortable with it right away. The interface is pretty easy to use. It's the magic is in the nuances. You want to get comfortable with the way that large language model works because a ChatGPT is going to be a little different from a Gemini or some other version of that. So just to quickly describe how I do use AI in my writing, I learned from all of these other experiences that large language models are extremely good at research. A large language model can dig through pretty much all of the digitally available information out there in extremely short amount of time and spit out a very cogent answer, not just a string of URLs like on a Google search, but like a very cogent explanation that, might be the same sort of thing you'd expect to get from a human expert in that subject. Again, having to be careful about the hallucination factor and all of that. But I learned very quickly that the model could be leveraged for doing research very effectively. So one example I would give is in my second book, there is a scene in at the Red Sea, the Sinai Peninsula, and the character is looking from the Red Sea toward the peninsula, toward land, and this is 110 years in the future. So I've never been to the Red Sea. I did a little research on climate. Really struggled to imagine how different things would be in 110 years. So I decided to ask ChatGPT. Okay, I gave it a very probably about 80 to 100 word query, which includes all sorts of things: the exact location, the date, the month, the year, the taking into account climate change, using the best available projections through the United Nations and so forth. That whole thing wrapped up in one query, and then enter that into ChatGPT and let it do its thing. And it gave me a a very interesting description of what this place in the Red Sea Sinai Peninsula would be like in 110 years from now. Nothing startling, and maybe that was the most interesting thing about it, is it was new. There were nuances to it, but it was very, very interesting to me. And so I really started using it a lot in that way to help me speculate, because trying to simply synthesizing the United Nations climate change reports and that sort of thing, if you're reading the whole thing, that takes some time and some serious cerebral energy. So having something else that can process all that, digest it, and bring it down to this particular spot on the Sinai Peninsula in 2110, that's a really valuable tool for a speculator. You know, um, that's probably the single most valuable thing I use for it, not just both in space and in time, in terms of asking about just climate conditions in this place, or socio-political questions about a particular area of the world. Um, the large language models are incredibly powerful at giving really good information, with those sorts of queries.
Great. Is anybody here? I see a couple of you have your microphones open. Rob Drury, you have a comment or question?
Yeah, a little bit of both, Reed. Thank you. And hi to Sheila. Bill, I'm very interested in your work in this area. I am familiar with some stuff that Gary Marcus has published at NYU. And one of the things that seems to stick out to me is that we really need to be cautious as to what we make of so-called artificial intelligence. It's not really new, by the way. It's been used for a long, long time, but just not with that label. In other words, it uses algorithmic processes, or step-by-step problem solving, and it's been the basis for lots of utilities that we've had around. But Gary has an interesting phrase, which I like, sort of, given my personality. He talks about being beware of artificial stupidity.
Yeah.
Because there's a tendency to sometimes, as you say, produce less than reliable output. And I did a little test of that myself just to see if it proved out. And it turned out that for some reason, at least ChatGPT did not find a number of things that I've written, and I'm thinking it's not biased against me. So I think it's some kind of problem with the system that it doesn't find, as you say, it reviews databases that are so huge that I don't think it really misses anything, but somehow they don't always hit very well. I think I would be interested in your
How many years ago was that?
that was
Just curious.
about 4 days ago.
4 days. Okay.
It was very recently because I was just getting concerned about what kind of use this tool is being put to. And, as you say, there's not just ChatGPT, but there's a number of players in the market right now, and who knows what their reliability is. I mean, I think, actually, I've heard some people say it's beyond our ability to know if it's reliable because it does so many things that we're unaware of. And,
Yeah, I
it's
think
like,
you're onto something there. Yeah.
I'd be interested in your views about should we be pretty cautious about what we do with the Chat GPT or other artificial intelligence platforms?
It's an excellent question. Obviously, there are people out there who are far more learned than I am on the programming and algorithms behind AI. I have been studying artificial intelligence since I was in college back in 1986. So I've been tracking it pretty carefully over the years. And actually, my information, the learning on that back then was what gave me the idea for this book, for Sapiens. But I think that is a very, very relevant question at this point. Some of the people here, I'm sure, have heard the news reports of ChatGPT, for example, having to adjust the large language models' access to information to prevent it from providing terrorists with chemical molecules, I guess, that could be even more deadly than other kinds of chemicals that currently exist, or viruses that could be synthesized. And apparently, scary as it may sound, apparently one of those systems, I think it might have been ChatGPT, was successful at developing in a very, very short amount of time these new molecules that, if synthesized, could be extremely deadly to humans. I think they went in and changed the model very quickly to remove access to that information. Maybe they should think about bringing in less terrifying information like yours, sir. But
I was, I was just going to joke, Will, that maybe Rob's thinking is so dangerous that they put you off in the corners.
Put the dunce
yeah,
hat on you.
That's true. Yeah, well, or a danger head. Anyway, Susan Dean.
Good afternoon. Well, I just wanted to share with everybody, and I don't know if the people that are sitting here cook. I cook quite a lot, and somebody said, try Chat GPT. And I opened it and it said, what do you want to make? And I thought chicken. And then it asks you, what ingredients do you have? So I just listed some random ingredients. Boom, there was a recipe that I could make at home with the instructions, how much I needed of each thing. I was shocked. I mean, it was like seconds. Has anybody else tried it?
I
So
haven't
that's
yet, but I do like to cook, so I'm going to try that now.
Yeah.
so I think
Because you may
that's
not,
an example. That's an example of, you want to make sure that when it says, 2 shakes of arsenic, you don't follow along.
exactly. Well, and you
Definitely.
may, because if you don't really want to go to the store because you're missing an ingredient, they might have a suggestion, of what you can
Yeah,
substitute.
alternative.
That I was going to ask Will in a little bit about ways that you could imagine using AI for other parts of your life, and you just described one there, Susan. The futurist Bob Johansson, who lives on the island, has told me that he prefers to think of AI as standing for augmented intelligence. So it's supposed to be an augment to our intelligence. Don't check your brain at the door
Yeah.
when you're talking to this artificial being. I know that we heard a couple of things about the things that might be concerning about this technology. And I guess the biggest issue is, could it open doors that we don't want opened, like Will was talking about, or could it direct us in ways like uh, GPS traffic folks that send you across the river instead of knowing that the bridge that was there went out? Um, and so I suppose those are the kinds of things we might worry about. Any other concerns that either that you might think about, Will, or anyone else?
Rob, did you want to say something? Go
Well,
ahead.
it is sort of a pet peeve of mine. Maybe I will get set in the corner, as you say, Reed, but I would also suggest that it's possibly dangerous to even call this mechanistic problem-solving algorithm a being, because a being implies a living organism. And I think we overestimate what this technology is. It's not a being yet. Who knows, maybe it could evolve into that. But I think we need to maintain a good level of control over this technology, which is, at this point in time, it isn't a living entity, at least not by most definitions of living. And I think it scares us unnecessarily to think of it as a being, like, some of these fantasies of killer robots. We scare ourselves with things that are not. Robots have not killed very many people. I think there's maybe 1,400 cases of death caused by robots, mostly in car manufacturing plants. And it wasn't the malfeasance of the robot by any means. It was the employee who actually interacted with the machine in the wrong way. So I think we should not be overly frightened of this, but watch it very carefully. I guess, Bill, I'd be very interested in your views on how to regulate this process. The United States seems to be going in the opposite direction right now of regulating anything. But do you have any thoughts on what regulation might be appropriate for this field?
I do. I think with large language models, we're presented with a really good opportunity to take a look at how this particular technology is going to affect humanity and society and our infrastructure and all of that, and try to put in place measures to control that now before things become even more powerful, because they are going to become even more powerful. They are pretty much every 6 months at this point. It's like becoming a new Moore's law, it seems like, where the large language model computing power is leaping forward exponentially, it seems like, every new version. So I think getting on top of it now, before the technology becomes even more powerful and even more ubiquitous, it would be a really, really good idea. The more advanced it becomes, the more ubiquitous it becomes, the harder it is going to be to regulate when it gets there.
Should we be communicating with anyone in particular, like our senators or our congressmen or our city council members, or who?
That's a good question. It almost feels like it is time to pull together some sort of public interest group on this subject, if one doesn't exist already. Maybe there are some in sort of natal stages, but I think the time has come. Like I said, I think this is the moment to get a handle on this. If we wait too long, it's going to get that much harder, especially for the politicians who generally don't do the book learning before they try to regulate.
Yes, good point.
Oh, on the other side of the coin, are there things about this technology? Susan mentioned one that excites you, that offer potentials that we will benefit from.
Absolutely. I think one of the best benefits of this is the impact that large language models have already had on loneliness, giving people basically technological friends, companions that they can interact with at home if they're home alone, if they're isolated. And I think this could have huge mental health benefits for the United States, where we're suffering from an epidemic of loneliness right now. Now, the question is that the best possible quality of social interaction? That's up for debate, I think. But loneliness is a terrible thing. And anybody who suffered from it, I think many would welcome having a technological companion to interact with versus no one at all. I also think that, all of you may have noticed small ways that artificial intelligence is already making its way into our lives, from just little opportunities to use the AI to write language for you instead of having to type it out yourself in all different places, or other forms where it's just very subtle, but you can see it popping up here and there now and then. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think we're going to see AI hopefully used successfully and effectively to sort of grease the skids of human process and infrastructure and just make life easier for us rather than scary.
I've heard that some people, the younger generation, because I just retired, so I don't need it, but they can put their resume information in and, their experiences, their, nonprofit work, whatever, and it'll put it all together in a very professional way. And then you can tweak it, I think, you can edit it. So there may be some business, it may affect business a lot more. I know I'm a retired real estate broker. And I know
Okay.
in the real estate business, they're using this to save time and writing letters and documenting issues and what have you. So it
Mhm.
may help the business community a lot.
Absolutely. I think it will.
I could see
Definitely.
something like, I know that probably a big part of that business, Susan, is trying to put together comparables for
Yep,
trying to figure out what price you might want to offer real estate at. Something
exactly.
that a computer with large language and large data might be able to help a lot with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'd also like to share something I found as a gift from my adult daughters. Is a program called Storyworth, and it uses artificial intelligence to have a person sort of walk through different aspects of their life. And so kids that have older parents frequently like to know, like, what happened in your earlier life if you haven't told them. And it is done in such a way that's very seamless and very easy, and sends you a series of prompts and helps research things too. I've seen it pull out some interesting pictures I've forgotten, for example, that sort of like a memory aid in a way. And I think to me, it seems like it's a relatively creative and relatively harmless way of doing something that I've talked to several of my friends. They seem very, very interested in this idea too. You end up getting a book about your life with all sorts of details that you've somehow been able to remember or find in the large language model area, and then share with your kids. And it seems like, to me, a very positive development.
Yes, Sheila.
Rob, I did that last year. I got it for a Christmas present a couple years ago.
What did
And
you think?
yeah, and you do it once, a new subject or title every week, and you write to it and go with it. Both of my kid families are really pleased to have it, because there are things in there that I don't think I would have remembered to mention in a memoir, and it's that just get tagged into it. I hadn't thought about it from this AI concept, but yeah, for sure. Yeah, and Storyworth is absolutely fantastic. I couldn't agree more.
Any other comments or questions for Will? Well, I really appreciate us, we're just scratching the surface here, but I appreciate you spending the time to think about this a little in advance and help us who are bombarded by, LinkedIn and the browser integrations. It's like, I don't want all this stuff. I don't necessarily need you. But on the other hand, when we have a discussion like this and present how we can use these things for our benefit and be wary of them, it's been very useful. So I think this is the first of many times we'll probably circle back and talk about this. I know it's the sort of thing that all of us are interested in. So thank you
Absolutely.
very much for taking the time.
Thank you, Will.
Thanks, Will.
You are very welcome.
Will.
Thank
Thank you,
you for
Will.
having me on.
You're
Will,
welcome.